The question is about Neil Young's electric guitar score, which was recorded in a somewhat unconventional way, right? You played him the film and he responded to it?
Yeah, well, I wanted Neil to ask Neil Young to make the music for the film, and I'd been a big fan of Neil Young's music, but most particularly his electric guitar playing and his work with Crazy Horse, his band, which is his more wild side of Neil's music. So I finally was able to get in touch with Neil, and at one point we were shooting the film actually in Arizona, and Crazy Horse was playing, and we had a weekend or one day off, I don't know, but I was able to get a lot of tickets for the crew to go to see Crazy Horse, and I also was able to get to meet Neil afterwards briefly through a very labyrinthine connection. So I got to go up to Neil afterwards, and he said, yeah, I heard you wanted to talk about your film. Have you finished it yet? And I said, no, we're still shooting it. And he said, well, I don't plan anything, so here's what you do. When you have a rough cut of the film, send it to me, and I'll get back to you very soon, I promise you. But I don't know, reading a script, I don't know, it doesn't mean anything to me. So when I had a rough cut of the film, I sent it to Neil, and like 2-3 days later, Neil Young calls me and says, hey, man, I like this film. Can you fly out here tomorrow, and you can stay on my ranch, and we'll talk about it? Which I, of course, did immediately, and I said, I referenced a film. I'm not a huge Eric Clapton fan, although I have respect for him, but he's not one of my favorite guitarists. But he did a beautiful thing for Stephen Frear's film called The Hit, where he pretty much scored the film with one electric guitar. And I mentioned this to Neil. I thought it was very beautiful, and would Neil consider scoring our film alone with an electric guitar? And he said, well, I don't know. I was thinking of getting, Kurt Cobain was gone, and he said he was thinking of asking the other two, Dave and Chris from Nirvana, to make a score with him. And he said, what do you think about that? And I said, I'll tell you tomorrow. I'm not sure. It sounds interesting. And then the next morning we talked again, and I said, well, that's a great idea. And he said, no, I like your idea better. I'd like to do it by myself. So then we recorded the film, in San Francisco in a warehouse. We converted it to a recording studio with a remote truck outside, and Neil played to a rough cut of the film, responding to it emotionally. And he had some themes. There are only a few, but which had already played me, and I said, these are great, So anyway, that's kind of how the score was made. I could go on with a lot of details and anecdotes about Neil, and working with him, but
you should give us one.
Well, okay. One was he's recording to the film with dialogue, and he said, I need to hear the dialogue in your rough cut while I'm playing. So I said, but Neil, that might bleed through. We're going to record. What if I change the edit? This isn't the final cut of the film. And he said, yeah, don't worry about that. And he left the room. And then I went in a corner with Jay Rabinowitz, the editor. We were both there. And I was saying, Jay, this is fucked up, Neil says he's, it won't bleed through, but he's playing to the track, and you hear their voices, and if I make any edits later, the music won't rest where it was, and it'll be a disaster. And Jay's like, yeah, this is complicated. I don't know. He seems so adamant. And we're talking. Suddenly, Neil walks up to us. He looks right in the eye in both of us and says, hey, man, I was out in the truck. Do you guys realize we have about 200 microphones in this room? I was just listening to all you guys were saying. And I'm going to have to say again, don't worry about it, man. It's going to work. And we're like, okay, all right. So anyway, he was listening to our conversation, but you cannot trick Neil Young. Don't even try. Don't try. Trust me. He's way ahead of all of us. So.